we're talking about the potential degradation of our critical thinking skills due to overuse and over-reliance on ChatGPT. That is a little broad of a way of putting it. Obviously, this conversation was kind of sparked by this Time article that came out, I think at this point, just about 2 weeks ago. So it's super fresh on the mind. Just to kind of like summarize the study, over 4 months, MIT researchers had about 54 people divided into an LLM test group, search engine test group, brain-only test group. They had these participants write essays in 4 sessions once a month, and they swapped their tool access. So the brain group started with just their brains. Second session, they started, I think it was with search engine a little bit, and then search engine, and then LLM. So they went vice versa, like LLM started with LLM and then eventually went all the way to brain. And then they wore EEG headsets to measure their brain activity. Absolutely no surprise at all. Participants who used their brain showed the highest level of brain connectivity, and the lowest was with use of LLMs like ChatGPT. For me, the most interesting thing, though, was it was shown that the LLM test group, the people who started using LLMs, consistently scored lower even when they went back to using just their brains. I think that, for me, was the most shocking part of the study. Obviously, we're not neuroscientists and we can't really say what that suggests long term. And it was a small sample size and it was simply an essay writing task. So it's an interesting finding, but at this point, there's not enough research to really say anything definitive. But the data is suggesting that leaning on these LLMs heavily can actually kind of reshape and diminish that cognitive engagement. So first off, do you just have any like general thoughts about this study? Was it something that surprised you?
I don't find it surprising at all. I mean, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think this is a surprising result? Because it's kind of like saying that if you don't do the work, you don't benefit and don't see any improvements, right? It's kind of like it's the difference between watching somebody going to the gym and going to the gym. So I'm not surprised at all. And I think there's a real danger in using these things as far as your personal development goes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wasn't surprised at all, just generally about LLMs not having the same level of neural connectivity. But I think, like I said, what did surprise me was that it didn't kind of return back to the same level of neural connectivity once they were using their brains on the essay writing task. That's what surprised me.
There wasn't enough background on that. I didn't get the background of the people that the study was conducted on. Did they choose people that would always use LLMs? Was the other group people that didn't before? Right? Were they on equal footing? So I don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, it's really the first study, at least, that gained this much traction around the actual effect of large language models on our cognitive abilities. But I do not by any means think it will be the last. I think we're going to see more and more research come out, and I'm really interested in seeing what it might say.
I don't think that they have a big impact on our cognitive abilities. It's really, again, it's just kind of like your choice to use them for everything or not use them at all. If you don't exercise something, you lose it over time. I studied physics at the university, and we used to do differential equations all the time. If you ask me to solve a differential equation today, I couldn't because I haven't done it for 25 years. And so the skills we don't use on a daily basis, we just completely lose again. If you rely on LLMs to do your day-to-day work every single day and you don't do it yourself anymore, the skills you once had, if you ever had them, are going to be gone. So that's exactly the danger here and what we're seeing here. And then, of course, if you go into education, the challenge will be you should have learned it to do it manually by hand before you're allowed to have a tool do it for you, right?
Absolutely.
Like math comes to mind. When I went to school, there's calculators, right? But we weren't allowed to use them. They could very well solve the problems we were supposed to do, but we weren't allowed to use them until we were able to do it manually. And then, going forward, you can accelerate the process by using a tool to do it. We're seeing the same thing here. And the danger, of course, is, and this was particularly about writing essays and education, it should not be allowed. It doesn't make a sense. It doesn't make any sense to have an AI write an essay for you.
I think my concern, though, is especially with just the ease of access to LLMs like this, inevitably middle schoolers, high schoolers who have access to the internet and have the ability to use it, I think are going to use it, and they're developing minds. So how is that going to impact them long term? We can't say, but I don't think it'll be positive.
It's the death of homework. Like the only way that you can now have somebody write an essay is if you do it in a supervised environment, right? Ideally without internet access. No cell phones allowed.
I was going to ask, I don't know if you know this, but I did study social science when I was in college, and it was brought up a lot. This obviously is before AI, the idea of cognitive offloading and how we pretty much consistently do this throughout our lives with a lot of different things, like hence creating books so that we can write things down so we can remember them later, or watches on our wrists so we don't have to look at the sun and have to determine it from there. So do you think there's any kind of fundamental difference between the way LLMs function and other types of cognitive offloading?
Well, so cognitive offloading for me is more kind of like a memory assistant. It's not so much about solving a task, but rather helping you remember how something was solved or what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And you will still have to go back to it when you need it. Let's say you wrote down the steps to solve a certain problem, and then you don't do it for a year. And then you come back to it and you ask, oh, I remember I wrote this down. You go back to it, but then you bring it back to memory. So you kind of like revitalize your knowledge. Very different from having an AI do it, right? Because the AI case, the AI will do the work for you. You will never, ever have to remember how to do the work. So I think cognitive offloading, more memory assistance, the skill remains with you. AI, kind of like you never had the skill.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially when it comes to reasoning, because at the same time, with calculators, obviously you can plug in an equation and you can get the answer pretty quickly. But if you want to understand why, there's no way a calculator is going to explain that to you.
Right.
You have to actually do the work yourself. This study was focused mainly on essay writing tasks. Do you think there's other tasks people regularly use large language models for that could possibly have the same level of effect on brain connectivity?
I think it's great to use them for things that are absolutely trivial, that are the equivalent of just shoveling sand, that you don't have to, there's no critical thinking involved, there's no skills involved, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like dumb work. I think it's great to use them for that. There's no harm done. I do think people use them in all kinds of situations, like writing software, coding is another example, right? Where it is much more dangerous to use them because you have this thing. It is a creative task. It is a skill-based task, and if you don't do it yourself, you lose this. First of all, you lose the creativity, and also you lose the skill. So I think you just have to be very conscious about how and when to apply them. Right?
Yeah, that's fair.
And ultimately, it is you and your skill set, right? So it's kind of you have the choice to go to the gym and exercise or not, right? Totally up to you. If you want to lose those abilities that this exercise brings you, don't do it, right? But you will lose that. And LLMs are the same thing. You can choose to use them, and at the same time still keep practicing your own skills by not using them all the time, or choose how you use them.
But do you think with impacts as potentially severe as cognitive decline, that should be something we leave up to individuals' discretion? Or do you think we should be more focused on things like regulation?
How can you avoid cognitive decline? I mean, there's people that sit at home watching television all day. No, you can't prevent it. You can't protect people from themselves. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah. That's a very fair point. But like I mentioned before, the participants who went from ChatGPT, or I suppose, I don't think they named ChatGPT, but whichever LLM they used, back to brain-only writing still trailed behind the peers, even the search engine peers. Do you think that the use of LLMs like this could potentially do any kind of permanent rewiring of the brain on a larger scale?
I don't think it's permanent. It's just like that lack of brain exercise. You can get it back when you start manually exercising again. Why the people that started off with the LLM then perform poorer at the manual task, I'm not sure, to be honest. Not too much in this study was kind of like mentioned how the people were chosen.
I think I'd also be interested, and honestly, they probably did mention it in the study, but I wasn't about to read 200 pages, about what exactly the topics of each essay was. It sounded like they were very similar topics that they had to write about each month, which is why I think it did surprise me that the LLM group, once they became brain only, still couldn't even recall a single quote that they written, even from the one essay in which they used their brain. That was interesting, and I really want to see this studied more.
Well, the question is, did they even read their own essay, or did they just like glance it over? Right? If I use if I use an LLM to write something, that's probably because I don't want to write it myself. So I just kind of like casually scan it and say like, oh, that looks good, done. Right? And there's just not that intense reading and internalizing of what you have just written that you would have when you manually write something. You don't rethink the sentence. You don't think how to write a sentence. You don't even think about what to write. You just casually scan and see whether or not what the LLM wrote makes sense. If it looks somewhat good, you're done with it.
Yeah. Let's just say that perhaps they do find that using and over-relying on these LLMs does end up affecting our critical thinking skills. Do you think there are any obligations that AI developers have to mitigate this harm, or should have, I suppose?
Well, the first question is, can they? I don't think they can. I don't see a way how you could prevent somebody from using something, right, for a certain task. Society as a whole can do it. I mean, especially in education, these things should be strictly forbidden. Again, I think it's the death of homework. I think any tests or any work needs to be conducted in a controlled environment, because otherwise you can't prevent it. And just like with the pocket calculator, I believe people should acquire the skills, learn to do things by hand before they use automation to do them. So in those scenarios, I think you can and should and have to control it. Once people grow up and they're free to use whatever they choose, not much you can do about it.
Yeah.
I would not encourage my employees to use it too much. If it kills critical thinking capabilities, right? It also leads to like a certain homogenization of creativity. That's something that they found in the study as well. Like all the essays kind of like were in the same line of thinking, the same line of reasoning. There was no individualism. There was nobody thinking out of the box. All these things are gone, right? If you have a workforce that relies on basically AI to do their job, that skill loss and the loss of deeper understanding of what they're actually doing is prevalent and will just keep happening. I guess it depends what you do, right? If you're operating a call center, sure, by all means use AI, right? If you're operating a research facility, encourage your people to hone their skills.
Yeah. The diversification of thought is inarguably incredibly important. You don't want someone who just gives you the same answer as the next 50 people. You want someone who's going to come up with interesting, creative solutions to issues. And if everyone's using the same LLM, if everyone's using the same reasoning because it's not their own reasoning, then you lose that diversification of thought. Do you think there's any way people could kind of go about refining those critical thinking skills, especially people like me who I have to use LLMs in terms of I don't have someone under me like an intern who can write 20 social media captions for me in a day. Obviously, I look them over and I edit them, but to actually get the drafts out there, I just don't have time for that. And I don't have anyone else to rely on. So I truly would not be able to do all the work I do if I didn't use LLMs. For someone like me, do you think there's specific ways that I could go about refining my critical thinking skills or creativity skills?
Well, not by using LLMs for sure. Well, that's independent of LLMs, right? How do you refine and hone your critical thinking and your creativity skills, right? Think outside of the box. I don't have a good answer for that, but that's completely independent on whether you use LLMs.
That's very true. It is different for everyone.
Sometimes, though, of course, you can actually use an LLM to give you ideas by creative prompting, right? You can kind of poke it to think outside of the box. You can give it something silly and see how it reacts to it, or even have like a discussion with it about something, right? Or it suggests something, and then you throw in a piece of your creativity and create something new out of it. So I think there's a use for LLMs in ideation and kind of brainstorming. Within limits.
Obviously, as I mentioned, this paper is small, 54 participants, and focused only on essay writing tasks. Are there any specific follow-up studies that you'd be really interested in seeing to map out some of the cognitive impact of LLMs?
I think I'm afraid that you don't even need to have a study. I think it will become quite obvious as people use these things for their day-to-day work. I think you will definitely see a loss of skill in the workforce that is using these things, and they will probably not be able to operate as well without them anymore at all. I believe it gets a little bit dangerous when you still consider that they are not always correct, that they do hallucinate. And if you have operators that cannot like critically review what the LLM is suggesting, that's rather dangerous, especially if you, for example, if they're used for software development, right? You heard about the term vibe coding, right? People that have very little to no programming skills can now write end-to-end applications.
That is me.
But whether or not these applications are architected and written in a way that makes sense, whether or not they follow certain security protocols and best practices, the people that wrote them that way do not possess the skills to make that judgment, right? And so they cannot even control the writing process and saying, hey, this doesn't look good, rewrite that. Because they just don't know any better. So you get something in the end that is kind of like maybe functional, but could be also potentially outright dangerous. Things like that worry me a little bit.
Yeah, things like that worry me a little bit too. maybe a little more than a little bit. But it's a brave new world we're entering, which I think about every time we sit down to have one of these chats, just how fascinating the next few years are going to be in this like wild west of AI. I don't have any specific studies that I'd be interested in seeing because honestly, I don't know what they would have to study, but I just have questions that I want answered. I'm really curious about whether or not using an LLM to do something specific then negatively impacts your ability to do it in the future, whether or not that's a temporary effect, whether or not that's a longer term effect. That's something that really interests me and worries me as someone who's relied on AI for like 3 years.
Well, the best example for that are my differential equations, right? I was pretty good at solving those manually by hand. Haven't done it for 10 years, didn't really need to, couldn't do it anymore today. So I think that's exactly what you were just saying. Even if you knew how to do something once, but then relied on a tool to do it for the next N years, you will forget, you will have lost the skill to do it manually. Now, if you had learned it previously, that might come back pretty quickly if you actually start doing it manually again. Maybe you don't ever have to do it manually again, but you will lose that ability. And I think in that aspect, that's exactly what LLMs are going to do to us, but more on a day-to-day task level. And again, I don't think it is dangerous to use them for menial tasks that don't really require a lot of thinking. I compare it to shoveling sand, right? Please make these things shovel sand so you save some time and some effort, but don't let your critical thinking skills expire by basically having the LLM do that kind of work for you.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to justify in my head about if I per se had some kind of intern who could draft 20 captions for me and I just have to review them and edit them. That's what I try and attribute it to. But when it comes to the actual deep thinking of, okay, well, these are the KPIs for this marketing campaign. I can see that this directly influences this. And so this is what I need to do. That's the kind of critical thinking that I try to keep in my repertoire of marketing skills. So I just think a lot of people don't necessarily see it like that yet because not a lot of people are as familiar with AI as you or at this point me are just because I'm adjacent to it. But I hear it in a lot of marketing people I've been talking with recently. They just really don't know how to use it. So they end up offloading some of those critical thinking, tell me what this data means kind of skills, which worries me a little bit.
Yeah, it's a similar thing in software development, right? It's really great. I use LLMs. It's important that you know exactly what you want to do and what the function or whatever little problem you're trying to solve is supposed to do. And you kind of know in your brain how it works. But then let's say you don't know the exact API syntax, right? And then you just go to the LLM, you describe the problem, you have it spit it out for you. In that case, it's not dangerous because you're pretty much the software architect. You knew exactly what you wanted. You can validate that it actually did what you wanted. And you forgot, you saved yourself the time of reading like 50 pages of documentation somewhere how to do this particular thing with this API. That's a fine example where the use is great. What you shouldn't do is, oh, I don't know how to solve this problem. Let's see if the LLM can tell me how to. Because at that point, you have that scenario where it's a skill to judge whether or not what it told you is correct or not.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, this is a bit more of like a personal use case, but for me, I scroll Reddit casually. Like that's one of my favorite things. And I'm subscribed to subreddits where sometimes people have like dramatic interpersonal conflicts with their partners or something. I've noticed, and I know this because I read a lot of LLM generated writing. A lot of longer responses when partners are arguing definitely sound like they've been generated by a large language model. And I've noticed an uptick in this. And one such recently that I read, I actually went into the comments because usually I just kind of scroll past from like, yeah, this sounds stupid. I went to the comments and the first comment was from the original poster saying, yes, I did use ChatGPT to draft this. I was just really emotional. I didn't want to have to like think about how to say it. Like, this doesn't seem correct. This seems like an inappropriate use of AI. Like you should be able to just say what you mean to your partner.
That's a bit extreme, but I often wonder, like just in correspondence, how many situations we have these days where it's one AI talking to another AI essentially. Because person A uses an AI to write the original, person B uses an AI to respond to it, and all they do is like casually fly over the text that it generated to see if it's still okay.
That's such a dystopian thought, but it's definitely happening out there, I'm sure.
Yep.
Well, that was all of the questions that I had. Do you have any questions for me? Anything you feel like mentioning?
Just that I wasn't really surprised about the study and the outcome. To me, it felt really, really kind of like, yeah, I could have predicted that because again, our brain is a little bit like a muscle that you have to exercise. And if you don't, it loses its abilities. And so, yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. It didn't surprise me. I think it just put it into perspective how widespread of an issue this might be in the future. As always, though, thank you so much for chatting with me. I always enjoy our conversations, although I do end up getting a little scared for the future. But it's always great to talk to you, Carsten.
When you ask about a study that we should do, is what I'm more curious to see is how are we going to solve this problem in education going forward, right? How do we prevent people from not being able to learn because they offload the things they're supposed to learn to an LLM?
Yeah, there's only so much we can do. I know when I was in high school, cell phones were around at the time, and there would be certain websites or apps that were blocked on the school Wi-Fi. So, I mean, I'm sure that's still a thing, but inevitably kids are smart and they're going to figure out ways to get around that. And then when they're at home, obviously they won't have the same restrictions. And then it's up to the parents, which, as many of my school teacher friends have said, most of the time, don't give a crap. It's just going to be a slew of issues. I do think there's like, potentially you can try with age restrictions. I know a bit different, but in Australia, they set, I believe, the age restriction for social media to 16. That's not going to catch everyone. But for people who aren't going to go much further than that, that could at least bring the numbers down of kids who use social media. But there's nothing that's going to be a catch-all. We can actually stop kids from using this.
No, I think the best thing you could do is you need to really like control the environment. No more homework, but have to give the kids like a supervised 2 hours or something while they're at school to do their supposed homework, and leave the electronic devices outside.
Yes.
Basically, have little box outside. Cell phone goes in. When you come out of school, you can get your cell phone back. Because with today's cell phones, there's no way you can, even if you restrict the Wi-Fi, you can easily circumvent that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm surprised, honestly, that, I mean, when I was in high school, and I suppose now it's been 10 years, so it has been a while, but all of our essays, except a few, if we had to work on them multiple times, we were writing with our hand. We would have those timed essays. You get a prompt, you write it by hand. I don't understand why or if that's so difficult to bring back. Although I do know kids have Chromebooks now in kindergarten, right? So they're pretty used to using that.
I was going to say the one thing about writing essays is sometimes it requires you to go to a library and research things, or at least research it with Google on the internet and then write about it, right? You cannot really do that in an isolated environment, so that's where it gets a little bit tricky. So
that's very true. I was already of the generation that didn't go to the library to read the books for research. I used Google. Yeah. So keep moving forward, I guess. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.